Martin Johnston is an English teacher and a podcaster, but he has had a fascinating journey, taking him from England to Rome to Sicily and then back again. So, in this interview, Martin and I will discuss the experiences that we've had living, studying, working, teaching English, and falling in love with a country called Italy. We'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Or, to be more precise, the things we love about Italy, the things that we don't like quite as much, and the things that we find just plain confusing. So, enjoy my interview with Martin Johnston. Okay, hello everyone. I am honoured to have Martin from Rock and Roll English on the show with me today. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Alistair. Thank you very much for inviting me. Very honoured to be here.
Well, it is great to see you. Today, the focus for this conversation is going to be on Italy. And it might surprise people listening to this or watching this that, in fact, the two people with lovely native level British accents are Italian. Myself and Martin are Italian, or at least semi Italian, or in fact, in my case, not really Italian at all. But we'll come on to that a bit later. But I thought it would be an interesting topic of conversation given mine and Martin's links to Italy, either by family, by marriage, or by living there. And I thought we could have a really fun chat about Italy, life in Italy, some of the peculiarities of life in Italy, and so on. So, Martin, can I just start by asking you a bit more about your links to Italy and your Italianness?
Yeah, so the three things you mentioned there family, I think marriage, and living there I tick all of those boxes because my grandparents were Italian. But even though my grandparents were Italian and my mum spoke to them in what I thought was Italian, but I then found out was dialect. So I didn't grow up speaking Italian. I still feel I grew up in a very British household, obviously with a bit of Italian influence in there. And then I moved to Italy, the thought being I would learn the language so I could speak to my grandparents in Italian. And that was when I realized that they didn't speak proper Italian, they spoke a dialect. And then I planned on going there 6 months and I stayed for nearly 12 years. And then I came back to England a couple of years ago with an Italian wife and one child at that point.
And you've now increased that one child to more than one child.
Yeah, and an interesting fact actually, for a period, now my daughter who was born in Italy also has a British passport. So before she only had an Italian one. But for a period we have two children and they had different passports. So one had an Italian and one had a British, and I still haven't got an Italian passport, so I've got a British one. My wife Italian. So when we would travel as a family of four, two had Italian passports and two had British passports. So yeah, that was a bit strange.
Did you have people at passport control sort of, raising an eyebrow and thinking, "What's going on here?" They all look a bit similar, but
Yeah, we even now we still get that actually. Yeah, we get a few of those strange looks because normally we're talking in Italian and then you give like a couple of British passports. So yeah, we definitely get a few strange looks.
and where were you in Italy?
So I spent 3 years actually living in Rome and then like 8.5 years in Sicily.
Okay, so a bit of a change.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually. So yeah, I've got experience of both, let's say the mainland and that crazy island down south.
So, for people who may not be too familiar with Italy, the kind of geography of Italy, and some of the dynamics of Italy, can you talk a bit more about life in Rome versus life in Sicily, and why you say that they are so different?
Yeah, I suppose so. People actually say when they talk about Italy, there is a very big north-south divide in Italy. There is a north-south divide in England as well, but I don't think to the levels of what it is in Italy. And basically they always say like from Rome down is the south. And so I think Rome definitely has things which are associated with the south, which I would imagine things like crazy driving, not so organized, these kind of things. But it also has lots of things associated with the north, of like being organized, like fast trains and stuff like this. While Sicily is very much, I would say, a bit behind in a few things in comparison to the northern parts of the country, sort of infrastructure and things like this, and certainly public transport, which is why I think Sicily hasn't really taken off as a tourist destination, because the public transport is kind of so bad that it's really difficult to move around. So you really do kind of need a car when you go there. And yeah, driving in Sicily is an experience, put it that way.
And what was it that took you to Sicily from Rome?
So I've got a bit of a crazy story actually. So the first time I went to Italy, as in went to Italy to live there, I went to Palermo in Sicily and I spent just one summer there. And then from there, I then ended up going to Rome and I spent like 3 years in Rome. And at that point, I thought, right, I'm done with Italy now. And I actually moved back to the UK. And almost immediately, I found a job for an Italian company in London. And so I worked there for, I don't know, like 6 months. And then they said, we would like you to go and work in our office in Palermo. So I kind of did like a full circle.
Okay.
And then, so it's like I didn't really choose Sicily. Sicily chose me twice, because the first time I went over there, I was young. I was like 25, and I thought I'll just go there for the summer. And I just got a job working in a hostel. I just thought I'll just get a job anywhere. So I sent emails to lots of hostels in all of Italy. This was the only hostel that got back to me. So I went to Sicily, and then 3 years later, I ended up getting sent to Sicily. So, yeah, it's a bit of a crazy story.
And I imagine that working life, even if you're in the same company, working life is slightly different in London versus in Palermo.
Yeah, the work situation in Sicily is not particularly great, and yeah, certainly sometimes in that particular company, and I know for a fact in others, the way sometimes people are treated is not is not so nice. So, for example, even me, the way some people spoke to me in the office in Sicily would never have happened in London. Absolutely not. Even though sometimes it was even the same people, um, but it was just that I just something about it. I'm not sure, but yeah, there is a very big difference in culture. I certainly, in relation to that, I specifically remember when I was working there actually, and a friend was coming out to visit me, and I went to like get some money out of the bank, and then I said, "Oh, I haven't been paid." And whilst in Sicily, that's actually quite a normal thing to be paid late and stuff like that never happens in London. You've got to be very unlucky for that. It's never happened to me in all the years I've worked in the
Mm.
UK. So yeah, unfortunately for work, that's one of the saddest things about Sicily, that so many young people have to leave, really, because even just looking around, you just think, well, where are people going to work? And unemployment of young people is extremely high. I think very early on, I'm not sure what it is now, but told me it was like nearly 50% of people that were aged like 18 to 30 or something like that. So it was a really, really high number.
Mm.
So yeah, that is definitely one of the saddest things, because having lived there so long, and my wife now Sicilian, and obviously I like her family, I like my family. The bad things about Sicily actually pain me now. Whereas before, you just kind of like, you don't really care. You're just a tourist, even though you live there. Now, I almost feel part Sicilian now, because you've got that connection. So yeah, these things do actually make me quite sad about Sicily, unfortunately.
Mm. Where I am at the moment, in Malta, which is just it's a hour and a half boat ride away
Mm,
from Sicily. There are lots and lots of Sicilians who've come here for, better economic
okay.
opportunities, and you see when you get talking to lots of them, they're saying a lot of the things that you've just said in terms
Mm,
of limited opportunities, even though everyone has got this deep love and kind of longing for Sicily to live up to its potential. There is this kind of realization that at the moment, at least, it's not a great place to be, especially a young person looking for a job.
yeah, unfortunately, it's true. And do you sometimes think things are going to get better, but then often things happen. You think, actually, no, it's almost sometimes getting worse. Um, but yeah, hopefully it will change soon.
Let's move on to a happier topic. What are some of the best things about living in Sicily, or in Italy over?
Oh,
We can perhaps we should start saying by saying Sicily, and then we should talk about Italy overall, because they are kind of two separate things. There will be separate categories of things, I guess.
well, yeah, from my experience from Rome and Sicily, yeah, I wouldn't say there were that many differences, but the biggest one for me, and I'd imagine the same for you, Alistair, for where you live, us growing up in the UK, the weather. I absolutely loved it. And the fact that you get like a real summer. For example, for the last couple of years in Sicily, I was working for myself, so I didn't actually need to go out. I didn't need to leave the house. And I honestly would not wear socks from like May until sort of nearly October.
Yeah.
Uh, because it's just and literally just shorts and t-shirt every day, and I absolutely love that. And one thing I particularly love is you go out in the evening and you're wearing shorts and t-shirt and flip-flops, and it's still hot. Whilst in the UK, it can be the hottest day of the year, like July, August, but in the evening it's cold. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's the hottest day of the year. On the subject of flip flops, actually, I got quite a lot of stick. Lots of people used to sort of make fun of me because they say, "Oh, like you're so English," because I would wear flip flops to go out to a restaurant in
Ah, yeah,
July,
yeah.
for example.
Big no no.
But yeah, oh, they were like, everyone would be looking at me and say, like, "Are you going to the beach?" And I was like, "No, why?" Um, because they're considered just for going to the beach. And my wife often saying to me, "Please don't wear the flip flops."
Yeah.
Uh,
I've had exactly the same conversation with my wife, and
right.
and I also I feel you on the socks point of view, because yeah,
Mm.
I'm wearing socks right now, but it is the 24th of January, and
Yeah.
uh, I have this kind of mounting collection of socks because I seem to be given socks for Christmas or that kind of stuff, and I can't get through them fast enough. So I think I probably got a drawer with about 50 pairs of socks, and they just keep on mounting. So if anyone wants any socks, let me know. I've got some new ones as well. I'm not trying to fob off my old socks. Got some fresh socks or two.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, good thing. So the weather, absolutely. And when we were in Sicily, our apartment had a sea view. That's like when we were talking about Sicily mainland. When I was in Rome, it's not so far from the sea, but in Sicily, it's almost impossible to avoid it because obviously it's an island. So unless you're real inland, but normally like the big cities are close to the sea. We had a sea view, so I used to walk out on the balcony and like have breakfast and look at the sea, and it was just such a great start to the day. More often than not, it was sunny, and I would actually just stand there, like just get the sun on your face. I've read that that's good for you, like when you first wake up. And I honestly feel that when I was there, I felt in myself healthier because of the sun, and I also believe that. Oh, it's not even I believe. I know that I could sleep less. For example, in the UK, I have to sleep more for some reason. I think it's just because it's dark and cold. I don't know. My body just needs more time to rest. Whilst in Sicily, maybe it was the sun. So that was brilliant. The sea, absolutely loved it. I used to cycle down to the sea in the morning. So again, from May to October, I would cycle down to the sea, jump in the water often in the morning, and then you feel like on top of the world. And like it's only like 8 o'clock in the morning. You haven't even really started the day. And the other one, it sounds obvious, but it's a real thing, is the food. I never thought that was a problem because I always thought in the UK you can buy whatever you want anyway,
Mm.
but it's just not the same. And even when if you just want to get something on the go, something quick, in the UK they have like a meal deal with like a disgusting sandwich
Mm.
that you get from like Tesco or Boots or somewhere. A disgusting sandwich, drink, and something. Whilst in Italy, even you just get like a pizzetta, like a small pizza kind of thing. Like these kind of things are just so nice. That are much more difficult to find here. Whilst in Italy, like in every corner, you can find stuff like that. So, yeah, those are definitely the three things. So, food, sea, and weather are the things, the best things about living in Italy.
Yeah, and I think to add to your food point, I think I also didn't. I wasn't necessarily sure how things could be so different because in the UK you can get almost anything you want at a supermarket, but things
Hmm.
like, for example, even tomatoes, right? You could go to a UK supermarket and there's probably lots of different types of tomatoes that you can buy, but they're night and day compared to tomato that you get from a market, a
Yeah.
random market in a village in Sicily. It's just they just taste of richness and deliciousness. Whereas in the UK, yes, it's a tomato and it looks like a tomato, and you cut it and look inside and it is a tomato, but it's a very different kind of taste.
I totally agree. In fact, very strangely enough, this story is very relevant to this. My mum obviously came out to visit lots, and every time she would come, she would normally bring stuff, maybe like for me, for my wife, etc. And then when she would go back, she wouldn't have that much in her suitcase and say, "Oh, I need to fill it." And a few times I remember her taking tomatoes home
Yeah,
just because she was like, "Oh, but they're so much nicer here." So literally taking tomatoes home. Uh,
that sounds like a very good idea.
so yeah, exactly. So yeah, definitely true.
And were you teaching in Sicily?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I was teaching English, um, and yeah, no, that was great. I also because also I was teaching when I lived in Rome, and I kind of feel in those 3 years I had no idea what I was doing, and then I got a job at International House, which is obviously quite a recognised language school, and yeah, that was fantastic work in there because everything was very structured and very organised actually, and yeah, that was a great experience for me.
And how did you find the experience of teaching in Italy? Were there any peculiarities? 'Cause I imagine lots of people who are watching this or listening to this will be Italian. So, were there any peculiarities of teaching English to Italians that are unusual compared to teaching English to people from Spain or France or Germany or anywhere else in the world?
Well, one thing which was very strange. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it was fantastic teaching Italians. Also, when you're teaching a language, what you want the students to do is talk a lot, and Italians are great at that. So that was brilliant. So you show a picture and you say, I don't know, what do you think this picture is? Like, talk to your partner, and they would talk and talk and talk and talk. Brilliant. Because what you don't want, which I have had in other lessons, generally maybe with other nationalities, or maybe a mixed nationality class, is if I say, "Oh, here's a picture. Talk to your partner. What do you think it is?" and no one speaks,
Mm.
then it's kind of like, "Oh, this is just awkward." But so it was brilliant to teach them. But one thing I found really strange, not necessarily about teaching them, but just something I found out. At the school, we would have exams for like you'd be like in level one, and then you do an exam, and you have to go to level two, etc., etc. And the strange thing about this was that even adults did this. So when they were doing the exam, they would first of all write in pencil, and then they would. So let's say that the answer to the question was computer. So they write computer in pencil, and then they go to the next question, and let's say the answer is book. So they write book in pencil, and they do everything in pencil, and then they go and do again with pen. So they put pen over the pencil. Now, obviously, this is going to take you double the amount of time. They would often run out of time. And I always said, why are you doing this? Because apparently in Italian school, you're not allowed to cross anything out in an exam
Okay, all right.
because if you do that, then it could be like someone's done something like fiddled with your exam. So you're not allowed to cross anything out. So what they do, so they're brought up doing this. They write all of the answers in pencil, and then they write with pen. But like 70-year-old like women were doing this, and I honestly every time I would say like this was not, it's not a state exam, it's just an exam in a language school. It's, you know, it's not the most important exam in the world, and I would always say, please don't write in pencil, just write directly in pen. But so often they just would not listen. Or before the exam started, if I didn't mention this, again, a 65-year-old man would put his hand up and say, do I need to write my answers in pencil first? And I would say, no, like what is this? And I was obviously shocked by this. So I didn't understand the reason for this. And then when I think it was my wife told me about the thing, so it's basically so you can't, because if I go to school, let's say you're my teacher and you want me to pass, and I wrote the wrong answer,
I can
then
cross
you
that.
change my answer, you cross it out, and you put the right answer in. And yeah, I mean that I think it's sort of almost a reflection sometimes of things about Italy, like bureaucracy and making things difficult.
Yeah,
And but yeah, that was one thing that really surprised me.
that is. I was not aware of that as a thing. I knew that
You
lots
should
of
ask
Italian.
your wife about it.
Yeah, I should. I've never caught her do kind of writing something in pencil and then filling it out, but I've never watched her take an exam.
But
Uh,
have you ever seen her do an exam though?
I have not. No. And I guess
Exactly.
there's lots.
Give her an exam tonight. Give her a written exam
I
and
will
see how she does it.
just yeah, just after now. Can you just complete this
Yeah.
10 question 10 question exam? I was aware of the one of the a strange thing coming from the perspective of someone who's grown up in the UK, that lots of its exams at Italian university are oral, and
Yeah.
where you go and it's a kind of it's a conversation with your professor or a combination of people, rather than everyone sitting down in a big hall and you having 2 hours or
Mm.
something to fill out to write an essay. And I remembered because I did an Erasmus placement in Naples, and
Ah,
um, I took one module that was it was too hard for me. I like it was a master's module while I was doing an undergraduate thing, and I realized after I started, I was like, wow, this is interesting, but it's kind of beyond my abilities. But the professor, I think he was. This was in 2006, I think 2000. No, so it was 2007, and I think at that point he was already 88 or something. So I hope he's still alive. But he was very very old when when he was teaching me, and he asked one day for volunteers for people who could help him put up posters for a seminar around Naples. I thought this is going to be quite fun. I'll go with him, and I was the only person who did it. And I was helping him putting out the seminars, putting out the posters for the seminars. And then when it came to the end of year exam, it was a oral exam, me and him. And he asked me a few questions, and I was like, oh, like I completely fluffed it. I completely messed it up. And I was thinking, like, what's he going to give me? That in the Italian university system, you get marks out of 30. And the
Yeah,
most you get
that's
is,
I've never understood why 30, but yeah, I know.
yeah, maybe someone can write in the comments and explain it to us. It doesn't seem to make much sense to
Yeah,
me, but there we go. And uh, after I did probably the worst exam I've ever done, I didn't get a single question right. Uh, he gave me he gave me the maximum mark, trenta laude, like 30
unbelievable.
and
Yeah,
congratulations or
yeah.
whatever. So I thought, okay, there we
30
go.
plus congratulations.
Yeah, I was very happy that I'd gone and put up the posters for the seminar.
Yeah, that
but I,
definitely worked for you.
but there was, yeah, other people in my class who'd not gone and put up the posters for the seminar, and probably who were able to give much better responses than me, who didn't get quite the same mark. So, so yeah,
Um,
not completely.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Uh,
A few things I sort of picked up on there. So one, you were talking about the exams and you said it's a conversation. No, I've never done an exam in Italy, but I know that that's probably not the right word to use because it's actually an interrogation, isn't
yeah.
it? That's what they call it. I specifically remember the very first time I was I was actually doing like a one-to-one lesson in this school in Rome, and someone was telling me about exams. I had no idea that they were verbal, and he was saying, "So how do I say an interrogation?" Like he said it in Italian, which is
Oh
basically
yeah.
the same, and I was like interrogation, but I just couldn't. I said, "What is he talking about?" But yeah, that is how they call it. It's an interrogation, which
Yeah.
sounds like you're under arrest, doesn't it?
It did feel like I was under arrest at a particular point, but then I was liberated.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And yeah, um, my wife, this is honestly one of the reasons we've moved back, is because she said, basically, I don't want my children having to be interrogated, because she was saying like from a young age, they have to like stand up in front of the whole class and like the teacher's interrogating them. It sounds horrific to be in front, because obviously there are times when I'd imagine it goes badly, and you just kind of make a fool of yourself in front of the whole class. And the exams that you said at university, I've actually been to a couple, because everyone can go, can't they?
Yeah.
So it's not like you're in a room and there's no one there, because again, it has to be public. So because if something goes wrong, or like they give you a mark that you don't deserve, which obviously happens even when people are there by the sounds of
Yeah.
it.
I,
Um,
I, I, I think no one had really bothered to turn up for my one.
oh, right. Okay. But yeah, just the thought of that. And I remember the one I went to, like, it was actually with my wife, and we got there at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and like had to wait until like 4 p.m. And obviously my wife was very anxious. I don't think she like ate or drank anything. And I was looking at her thinking, she just looked like as white as a ghost by 4 o'clock. Because yeah, they don't do it like, okay, so you're at 8 o'clock, you're at 8:30, stuff like this. It's just come
Yeah.
and
Come and do
then
it.
come and do it. And yeah, I mean, that sounds tough. But another thing that you mentioned, from what I understand, again, I haven't studied in Italy, they study a lot, and it's much more difficult than the UK. I remember my students coming, and because they would go to school in the mornings and then maybe have a lesson at the English school at like maybe 3 o'clock. And then they would say, "Oh, when I go home, I've got to do 5 hours of homework." And they were like 12. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, what? Like, that just doesn't happen in the UK. You don't get, well, obviously I haven't been to school in a while now, but it certainly wasn't like that in my day. And my brother has um, two children, one of which has just started secondary school. And I know for a fact she doesn't get anywhere near that amount of homework. Yeah, it just sounds horrific. I spoke to so many people as well that said, um, "Oh, I played football or volleyball until I was 14, but then I had to stop because of school." Like, what do you mean
Yeah.
because of school? And they said, "Well, the homework was too much." Like, I've never heard anyone say that in the UK, but I've heard a lot of people say that in Italy. So yeah, I do think that they make it really hard for you, and like those exams, people like study books like that thick,
Yeah.
and they basically need to know every single sentence in the whole book. It's just incredible.
When I first arrived in Naples, I was living in a house with, I think, I don't know, 7 or 8 other people, and there were three Italian girls, and every evening, yeah, they were all studying law, I think it was, like, yeah, jurisprudenza, and they'd have these huge textbooks, which are obviously not official textbooks, but photocopied versions of the
Yeah,
official textbook,
classic.
um, and which, to reiterate, is what we were all advised to do. There were shops that sold the
Yeah,
photocopied
yeah,
version.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, in the evenings, they would kind of sit around the kitchen table with highlighters and just be reciting parts of the legal code.
Mm,
And I remember the
yeah,
first time I was like, well, like, what are you doing? Do you really have to do that for the exam? And they said, yeah, that's what we have to do. We're asked to recite parts of it, or people says, what does,
yeah.
yeah, article number 724 part 2
I know.
B say? And then you say it's blah blah blah, which to me just seemed very strange. Also because presumably, if someone, if someone needs that knowledge, then they they can find it. They don't need to have it all stored in their
Exactly.
brain and spend however many thousands of hours encoding it
I
into their
know.
knowledge. It just seemed unusual.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And they say, don't they, like ripetere, they have to repeat.
Mm.
Like, so, like, I'm sure it's the same for you when you were studying for your exams in the UK. You don't actually, if you're in your room studying, no one would know you're there because you do it in silence. But they have to constantly repeat these things and say them out loud, because apparently that's like the method that helps you in the exam, because you obviously, it's a verbal exam. So yeah, the whole system is totally different to what we're used to.
One of the reasons I was interested in hearing about your experience kind of teaching English in Italy, and if there were any peculiarities that you had seen with Italian students versus students from other nationalities, was partly because one thing I tend to hear quite a lot from Italian students is about the fact that their school time experience of learning English has left them with lots of bad memories, and kind of they feel like they have some understanding of English, and they have got some sort of base knowledge of grammar, and they've studied English for a long time. In many cases, people studying it for 10 years or so, but they feel that their ability to actually, firstly, understand native level English, and secondly, be able to reproduce even relatively basic sentences is quite low. And I wonder how much of that is to do with some of the stuff that you mentioned in terms of the kind of repeating
Yeah,
based school system.
it's very possible, because again, I remember helping people maybe with homework in like some of the years I maybe was doing private lessons, and I remember specifically helping a girl that was sort of getting towards the end of high school, and they basically just had to repeat things again. She was studying things that were far, far, far above her level, like things that we studied in school, of like maybe something about like Oscar Wilde and the language that was used. But they didn't really need to use the language. It was just repeat something about Oscar Wilde. So I don't know, maybe the question in the exam was, who is Oscar Wilde? And they would have to repeat something from the book. And but so they weren't actually learning the language so much. It was just repeat this one thing. Um, I actually remember once I in Palermo there was like some tours going on. It was like in a church, and I went in and there was some school kids there, and they said to me, English? So I said, yeah, and they told me the history of the church in perfect English, and then I asked them a question, and they had no idea what I was saying. It was quite a simple question, because they had just been trained to say that one thing, but
Mm.
didn't have any other idea of anything else. But the language, I think language learning in general, certainly also for me when I was learning French at school, because it's done in a way. for example, the same way as maths, of like the teacher there, like writing stuff on the board and like complete this exercise. So yeah, I studied French for like 5 years, and I mean, my French is zero. I could probably tell you my name. My name is Martin in French. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if that's just an Italian thing. I think another big thing. So if you go to like more of the north of Europe, a thing that influences this is northern countries have like films in the original language with subtitles. And I just think sort of growing up, the amount of like Disney films you probably watch, that has a big impact. Whilst in countries like Italy and Spain, I know it's generally dubbed.
Mm.
So I'm not sure how English is taught in a different way in, for example, Sweden, for example. But I would imagine it's probably not that different. And I also looked at some study once, and it was like the numbers of hours that English is studied is actually more in Italy than in other countries. But maybe they have a lower level, and I believe my theory is because of that like films are dubbed, so they don't actually ever hear the language at all, because they're
Mm.
just like completing exercises from a book. So they don't actually hear the language. They just, it's just like maths of like what verb goes in this like gap fill.
Mm.
That's my theory anyway.
It's an interesting theory, and I think there's probably a lot to that. Um, so we've talked quite a lot about some wonderful things about Italy, some things that are strange from the perspective of a Brit, someone who's grown up in the UK and then moved to Italy. Let's flip it now, actually, because you and your wife and your family have have gone the opposite direction. You've gone back to the UK, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Correct.
and I'm sure going from Sicily to the UK is as much of a kind of culture shock, thermic shock, as you going from the UK to Sicily. So, what have been some of the big adjustments for you coming back to the UK after you say 12 years away? I imagine coming back during that, but 12 years away, not living there. And what are some of the adjustments been for your wife?
Yeah. So I honestly think I think I'm sort of getting used to it now. It's been like 2 years now, nearly. But the culture shock was, I think, was almost bigger for me, because for her it was like new and interesting and great, whilst for me it was kind of like it's just weird moving back to my hometown, which I hadn't really lived in since before I went to university, because I went to university, then I lived in London, then I moved to Italy. So yeah, the reverse culture shock I suffered from a lot. um, and I think for my wife it was less of a huge impact because she was with me. When I went to Italy, I was totally alone. So, for example, we were still talking Italian at home. So I think that helped her. But obviously, yeah, there are lots of things which she finds strange. And I must admit, I find strange now as well. Yeah. So, for example, eating times in Italy, it's very rigid, of sort of like 1 o'clock is lunch, and then anytime from, well, in Sicily generally 8 o'clock is dinner. Now my wife is actually quite flexible, especially with dinner. We actually have dinner very much English time, because we have two children, sort of like 5 o'clock, 5:30, and she's okay with that. But it's when we go out, or you, for example, it's a Saturday and people invite us maybe to go and have something to eat, and they'll say like, let's meet at 3, and I think, well, I can't wait till 3 until having something to eat. So I'm going to
Mm.
have to eat something before. So like, what kind of time is that? Like, it's just, for me now it's a very strange thing. Whilst before that was totally normal, but now I'm just so used to pretty much having a plate of pasta for lunch that I can't wait till 3 o'clock. So when people say let's go out at 3, I think like that's mental. So yeah, that would be one. My wife massively suffers from the no b-day thing, which I think all
Yeah.
Italians suffer from, especially women when they move to the UK. Literally every single day she will say, like, we need to have a house with a bidet. That's a huge one. And another one is kind of doing things with someone. You definitely hear you almost need to book things in advance. Like if you want to do something with someone, let's say I want to go to the pub with you or something, I need to basically tell you 2 months before, and like you need to send me like a Google invite,
Mm.
and I needs to go in my calendar. Whilst that's not really
That's
the
not very
case
Mediterranean.
in Sicily. No, definitely not. And then sometimes if you like we've said to people like, oh, like on the day, do you want to do something today? Like, "No, I'm busy. Like how dare you ask me on the day? You were supposed to ask me this
Yeah.
like 2 months ago." um, so yeah, those are the ones that spring to mind.
Are those all things that you've sort of realized and started to appreciate how strange they are through your wife's eyes, or are these things that you sort of thought were strange before?
No, I certainly didn't think they were strange before. But no, it's not necessarily my wife that thinks these. Also, I think these now, having lived abroad. And another thing actually is the card culture. Now, what I mean by that is, so in the UK we have like card shops like Clinton's and all of the other ones. So you, maybe for people that don't know, you go into this shop and you can buy a card for like every birthday. They've got different ages. You can buy birthday for like son, daughter, granddaughter, cousin. You can buy them for passing your driving tests, like for everything. And yeah, that's not really a thing in Italy at all. But for example, Christmas cards, like obviously Christmas wasn't that long ago, and you're expected to send people Christmas cards, and it's just like, oh, for God's sake, like, do we need to do this?
Yeah.
Um, but but again, that's something I hadn't really thought about. But
They're also
yes,
very
something I
expensive, the
definitely find
cards
strange.
for what they actually are, right? You're probably talking £2.50, £3 for
Yeah,
what is essentially just, and then once you're adding on your postage to that, it's probably you're not getting much change from £5 for essentially what is just maybe 7 words.
yeah, exactly. And in fact, I'm still not 100% sure about this. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with those cards because in the end, you have to throw them away because otherwise you've got like cards like they build up like, and you've just got like loads of birthday cards, so they end up getting thrown out. I'm a bit anxious about revealing this just in case anyone's listening saying you throw out my cards. I don't actually know what the done thing is, but it must be that. I'm sure I'm not the only one that throws out cards. Otherwise, if you're 60, one room of your house will just be full of birthday cards and Christmas cards. um
Yeah,
so yeah, they stay on like maybe like the cabinet for a few days and then it just gets thrown away anyway. So to me, it just seems like a complete waste of time. And for example, thank you cards. This one, now we've got kids as well.
yeah,
So I don't know. I buy something for one of my friends' kids, and then they give you a thank you card, and then you think, oh, like, do I need to give a thank you card to a thank you card? Like, when is this going to end? Like, it's just you can just send me a message on WhatsApp and say thanks for the present, and that's fine. You don't need to send me a
yeah,
thank you card because then I feel under pressure to send you a thank you card.
yeah. My wife found that to be a very strange and kind of pointless thing in the UK because my mum would always said, yeah, send someone a thank you card, a thank you letter after they give you a present. And
Mm,
she, I'm not sure if this is a whole Italy thing, but at least she'd been told she'd been like taught like call that person and say thank you for the present that you've given. Um, and yeah, clearly there's no like right or wrong answer. They're both nice things to do. Sending a WhatsApp message is a nice thing to do as well. At least kind of acknowledging it, I guess, is a good thing. But it was interesting to see her reaction towards this cultural difference of she'd always been told call them, call that person, whereas in the UK, at least some people expect or kind of appreciate at least a thank you card. So it's a funny thing.
mm. Yeah, exactly. And then when you get presents, certainly for our kids now, people maybe that I'm certainly not close with, maybe like friends of like my mum will send the kids a present, and then you're expected to then send a thank you card to someone that you like probably have never even spoken to.
Yeah.
And it's not like my kids are writing the thank you cards either. So it's just another
Do you
annoying thing to do.
do you try and write the thank you cards with like really bad writing so it looks like it could be written by a child?
Not at the moment. Maybe when they're a little bit older, because at the moment they're like, well, just coming up to 3 and 1.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So yeah, a bit young. Yeah.
You could do very bad writing, and at least someone would think that they're advanced for their age, especially the 1 year olds.
Well, yeah. What I actually have done. So, like the nearly 3-year-old, sometimes I'll just ask her to like draw something, and well, I say draw something, just make a bit of a mess on the page, and then sometimes when maybe if I'm writing it and maybe she's in bed, sometimes I just put a bit of a mess on a page and I say, oh, this is her saying thank you.
Yeah.
I don't actually write, but I'll just like draw some stupid lines and say it was her, but in reality it was me just drawing stupid lines.
Well, no one will know, and we can cut that bit out of the interview. Um,
Yeah.
I just want to ask you one more question before we get on to talking a bit more about kind of your views on English learning and that area. Given that you've been out of the UK for so long, and you say it was actually you more than your wife that suffered from reverse culture shock, not culture shock, um, or rather reverse culture shock in your case, culture shock in her case. What were the main things that you saw that had changed about the UK since you left?
For me now, I mean, in like culturally, I don't suppose I haven't seen that much. One thing that was a big part that I saw before of culture, which I don't think has gone, but just for age thing, was like alcohol. So it was almost one of the reasons I left. I just thought I can't continue drinking this much alcohol. So in Italy, I could sort of get away from that, and I certainly don't drink anywhere near as much alcohol as I did. But I think that's just an age thing. But one thing, the biggest thing for me is how expensive the UK is, which now it was expensive also before, but I think because I moved from London to Rome, even though I had spent summer in Sicily. I basically moved from London to Rome, and I remember going to Rome thinking, "Oh, I think things are cheaper here." It's really good because in comparison to London, it was cheaper. And then went from Rome to Sicily. Now in Sicily, everything is really cheap. And when I was in Sicily, I went back to Rome many times, and I would always think, "Oh my god, everything's so expensive here." So now going from Sicily back to the UK, it's just been like, whoa. Like, for example, when we used to live in Sicily, we'd go to like the local pizza takeaway place, and normally on a Saturday night get 2 pizzas, and that would cost like €14, something like that. 2 pizzas, generally like with something to drink as well. The pizza place we go to here, if we get a takeaway, if we order from the app, like the Deliveroo app, just 2 pizzas, nothing else, is £40. So that's
Wow.
like 45 euros just for 2 pizzas. And that is just, it's painful to pay that much. And obviously, like rent houses is just astronomical, especially because we're in the southeast, very close to London. In the For what you would pay for a very standard kind of 3-bedroom house here, you could honestly buy a villa with a swimming pool in Sicily. That's not an exaggeration either. You definitely could buy a villa with a swimming pool. So that's the main thing for me. Just like, oh my god, this is so expensive. And I know there is obviously like the cost of living crisis as well, but yeah, it just seems like, and this is all one of the reasons why I still now think maybe we're going to have to move back, because it's something that does go through my head. I can think, well, I can live like really well over there, or kind of live near the poverty line here? um, is it really worth it? So I do ask myself this question sometimes.
Well, maybe we'll speak again in a year, and we'll find you in a villa in Palermo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's move on a little bit and talk a bit more about an idea that you have that I think is super interesting that I'd love to ask you more about, and that's your. Am I right in saying it's your idea of jungle English?
I wouldn't like to take all the credit. I kind of did steal that from someone who wrote a book. Um, and I actually spoke to this person before and said, can I use this for the course? Because I just think it's fantastic. And he was very, very keen for me to use it because he wants to spread his ideas. So I wouldn't want to take the credit for it. But so the metaphor he uses, I'm not intelligent enough to come up with something like this, is so it's he uses the greenhouse, garden, jungle. So when we learn English, most people learn words in their greenhouse form. Now, if you think of a greenhouse and the plants in the greenhouse, you have one plant here and then you have another plant here, very separate, not touching each other. So if you learn a word, for example, the word remember, that would be the greenhouse form of the word. You hear it perfectly pronounced, remember. But then there is the garden where the plants, which represent the words, are now touching each other. But it's still a garden. It's still quite in an orderly fashion. And this is maybe the English you would expect to find on maybe the BBC, maybe even the English that I'm using now, because when people want to be clear, so also if I do a speech, not necessarily for like English learners, also for like English people, I would still use garden English because I would want to be clear so people can understand me. But then there is jungle English where the plants, now it's impossible to see basically. It's just one big mess to see where one word finishes and the next word begins. So if we take the word remember, you might hear that spoken quickly. I remember, I remember. So you've lost a part of that word, for example. Um, so yeah, it's teaching jungle English, which is especially important for people that want or that already do live in the UK, or people who simply want to understand English films. Because if you watch an English film, it's made for like native speakers, and that's why everyone has so much difficulty. And speaking of films, this sort of highlights the concept quite well, that the way things happen now, everyone learns sort of visually, whilst that's not how languages are learned. Languages are learned through listening. And so an example of this is when people watch a film. I hear this so often. I don't understand without the subtitles. So they put the subtitles on in English and then they can understand. So then I say, well, if you can understand with the words here, that means you know these words. So why can't you understand without the subtitles? Because you know these words, you clearly know them, because they can't recognize them when spoken in jungle English. So it's helping people to understand that, because I truly believe that it's that listening is the way we learn languages. For example, reading and writing 200 years ago, almost no one could read or write, but everybody could speak, and people also learnt foreign languages. My Italian grandfather, for example, until the day he died, he was illiterate. So he never went to school. He was come from a poor family in the south of Italy. Never went to school. Never learned to read or write. But he could speak obviously Italian and he could speak English. So he just learned that from listening, because listening is like the primal instinct for us as humans. But now it's all the focus is on reading and writing. But once you can fully sort of digest the language, that's when it comes out more naturally. So, for example, my Italian, like I think, like most British people, we're not really that great at learning languages. So it took me some time. But the biggest jump I saw was when I watched Sex in the City in Italian. Because before that, I remember thinking, no, I can't watch anything in Italian because I just couldn't understand. And I remember someone had an episode on, and I sat there and I thought, I more or less understand what's going on here. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just watch this then, because obviously they're not talking about politics and economics. And then I watched every single episode. I think there are like 96 episodes of that. And then from there, so when I was talking to people, because I was then just learning how to understand things, whereas before, maybe in my mind, I was trying to think, okay, what's the past of that verb? Okay, so now I need to use this tense, and sort of having grammar conversations with myself. It was just coming out just naturally, because it's as simple as it comes in, comes out. But if there's a block somewhere here of what's coming in, there's going to be a block of what's coming out. So it's kind of like removing that block, is basically what I try to do. Another good analogy I have actually is, so if you have this keyboard, okay, now if I took off some of these, so let's say I take off this, and this, okay, these letters, and you're trying to send an email and you don't have those letters, that's going to be a problem. And it's the same when we speak. So it's because in the listening course, we really look at the sounds of English, because not many people actually teach you the sounds. So, and when I say sounds, but what I'm actually saying is movements, because it's a movement that makes a sound. So we break down all of the sounds. So you have all of the sounds. So you have all of the letters, let's say, because then that's going to help you to recognize them and also to produce them. So yeah, it is a listening course, but it will naturally help you become more fluent, because what I always say now, which again I truly believe, is to become a fluent speaker, number one is you have to be a fluent listener.
Okay, and so for people listening to this and thinking, I can understand garden English, I can understand this conversation, I can understand the BBC, I can understand materials that are geared towards non-native speakers, or that are spoken in more formal contexts. But I want to be able to understand movies. I want to be able to understand people at the pub. I want to be able to understand jungle English. What advice would you recommend for them?
So I would say the first thing you need to do is look at the sounds, because it's just the fundamentals. So everyone makes this mistake. The same with me in Italian. So the R, the R. So in English it's like a R, whilst in Italian it's like a roll, like R. So for example, if I said I wanted a beer in Italian, like you have that birra. Now for me, I would just normally, certainly in the past, sometimes even now, if I'm lazy, say birra, because I can't make that sound. That for me, that's not a sound in my language. So what we do, we we grow up making the same movements, and so the same movements, the same sounds, and then we learn a new language. So we just think, well, I'll just put these sounds in this language. But obviously, every language has its own sounds. So to learn those sounds, because studies have shown that when you can't produce those sounds, you actually have difficulty recognizing them. That's why people have difficulty with, I don't know, like sheep, ship, because, for example, in Italian, they don't have that I, they just have E. So not only they have difficulty like producing that, so very often you'll hear someone say ship like sheep, they have difficulty understanding that, because they're not familiar with these movements. So it's just training yourself to become familiar with these movements, which are the sounds. So that is the absolute fundamental part of it. And then to understand how like connected speech works, so you know what you're looking for, basically. So for example, let's say a simple classic one would be, so I don't know, do you like it? Okay, now that was said in a very much greenhouse form. Do you like it? Now no one talks like that, because you sound like a robot, but that's kind of what people are looking for. But then that, certainly in jungle English, would just be, do you like it?
Mm.
Do you like it? Do you like it? So people go, whoa, what the hell is that? But if you know, for example, how connected speech works, you would know that, for example, do you would most of the time it's like j.
Mm.
So start with the sounds and then actually go into how connected speech works, because there are so many things which you'll find out, which when in conversation, then you would start recognizing. And then from there, I always say, like, so my jungle listening course, it's not you do the course and everything's boom. Now you understand everything 100%. It's just you remove that block, which I said, and then you start noticing things. So it's like, so that, oh, I understand. Like, ja, he just said ja, that means do you. Okay. And then this just keeps going until you obviously then your listening skills improve a lot. So yeah, that would be my advice. Start with the sounds and then understand how connected speech works.
Okay, that sounds like some solid advice indeed. Cool, Martin. I think we've covered a lot of really interesting stuff today. So I hope people have got as much value from it as I certainly have. Can you tell people listening to this or watching it where they can find out more about you and rock and roll English?
Yeah, so the heart and soul of Rock and Roll English is our podcast. So if you go into Spotify or any of the podcast apps and you type Rock and Roll English, now it's an Rock and Roll English, and I am the only English learning channel that has a grammatical mistake in the logo, because that should have another apostrophe there, which I didn't actually notice. And then someone sent me a really angry message on Facebook telling me that there should be another apostrophe, and I responded, yes, you are right,
The
but
apostrophe, please.
it's just an apostrophe. Can you can you, yeah, the apostrophe, please, can you please calm down, because it's just an apostrophe. Now I have actually left it there as a sort, I could easily just get an apostrophe put there, but as a sort of sign, as a message to say, like, the language learning is all about making mistakes, so you just have to accept it and go with it. So yeah, if you type in Rock and Roll English into Spotify or into Google, and I will come up.
Excellent. Well, I hope the person who was so cross about that mistake of the with the apostrophe has calmed down. And if you if that person is watching this, then that is an excellent explanation about why it is nice to leave it there. Okay, thank you so much for your time, Martin, and yeah, have a wonderful day.